So, fans of this channel will already know that I'm a big fan of reading, and being a fan of reading means that I've got a special place in my heart for letters. You remember letters, right? They're the building blocks of words. You learned them in school, all 26 of them if you're an English speaker like me. These 26 letters are like, a big deal. They're the foundation for the communication of ideas, along with the 10 basic numbers. These relatively simple and fundamental symbols are routinely combined to express information, and while the occasional 140 or I guess 280 character tweet can cause us to somewhat lose faith in the future of humanity, without these characters, things would be pretty awful. See, these 26 letters, they're dependable. Once you learn them, you rely on them. They're always there, and you can count on them to never change, right? Well, not quite, because as you're going to learn today, the alphabet as you know it wasn't always this way. So here are 10 letters we dropped from the alphabet. That's right, 10 letters that everybody used to know about and use, but have since been purged from history. I know you're still reeling from this concept. I'd be dumbfounded too if I had just learned that my entire life was a lie. But not to worry, maybe by the end of this you'll have found a new outlook on existence itself. But we're just getting started down the rabbit hole for now, so strap in. Let's start things off easy with letter number 1, the long S. Now, some of you have probably already run into the long S while perusing old books or walking around colonial Williamsburg during your annual family vacation. Probably happened like this. You came across a word that should have had an S in it, but instead you found this funky looking F thing. Don't worry, the publishers of Paradise Lost weren't dumb enough to have a typo on the front cover of their book. This is the long S. You're probably thinking, oh, okay, I get it. They just used this instead of a lowercase s back then, but that's not entirely true. The modern lowercase s was around even back then, and used just as often as its long counterpart. In fact, there was a ridiculously overly complicated set of rules to determine which s to use and where. Basically, you use a long s whenever you've got a word that uses a single s, or when a word uses two s's at once, in which case the long s is used as the first s, and then you use the regular s as the second s, but only if that s is at the beginning or in the middle of the word in question. Clear as mud, right? Everybody else eventually thought so because the long S got the boot at the start of the 19th century as letters got a bit modernized. This purely stylistic substitute was seen as unnecessarily complicated, so it becomes letter number 1 on our death list. Letter number 2. Ampersand. Now, okay, this one is still used occasionally. In fact, you probably already know what it means. Ampersand is a letter that means and. You're probably thinking, Austin, ampersand is a symbol, not a letter. Au contraire, mon frère. As recently as 2 centuries ago, ampersand was considered the 27th letter of the alphabet, often just called and. So instead of singing W, X, Y, and Z, little Latin-speaking kids would sing W, X, Y, Z, and per se, and. That ending eventually got strung together by English speakers and became ampersand. With the invention of text messaging and Twitter character limits, ampersand has had a bit of a renaissance in recent years, but I doubt it'll get added back as letter 27 in English textbooks anytime soon. Number 3, thorn. Hey, here's a question. You ever drive by some dive downtown and it's got a sign outside that says Ye Old Brick Tavern or something like that? I actually see it quite a lot. My favorite in my hometown of Springfield, Missouri is this little car wash that's affectionately called Ye Old Buggy Bath. Buggy. Anyway, it might interest you to know that that Y on ye isn't actually a Y at all, but was a derivative of our third letter, thorn. In a nutshell, thorn was a letter meant to represent TH. If you ask me, it looks pretty sweet, but German and Italian printers didn't have that symbol on their typesets, so eventually the symbol was replaced with a funny-looking Y, though it still held its original pronunciation. So even though this looks like Ye Old Buggy Bath, back then they just pronounced it as, well, yeah, the old buggy bath, because the Y wasn't a Y, it was a thorn. Sorry if that, burst your historic bubble if you thought otherwise. Number 4, that. This is basically just a remix of the letter thorn. You just draw a line through the top. Like ampersand, this letter was used as shorthand, this time for the word that. It actually caught on fairly quickly and lasted even longer than the original letter thorn did. It was probably most widely used in religious writing, so if you happen to have some Old English Bible commentaries lying around, just crack them open. You'll be sure to find it. Number 5, F. F is a little thorn wannabe. I am not a fan. Look at its stupid face. It's just a D with a line through it. Get your own gig, you poser. So long story short, F was also used as a symbol for TH, but a different kind of TH. What do you mean a different kind? TH sounds the same on everything. Oh yeah? Check this out. Thoughtful, thing, this, them. Hear the thunderous difference? One of them is something called a voiceless dental fricative. The other is called a voiced dental fricative. Oh yeah, I have words. Number 6, ash. This thing is basically an A and E smashed together. You might see it occasionally in words like ether and eon if you're reading a sci-fi or fantasy novel that wants to look cool. In Old English, ash represented a sound somewhere between A and E, essentially like you would pronounce the A in cat or thereabouts. As you might imagine, having a letter meant to represent a sound somewhere between two other sounds is not very definitive, so ash fell out of common use, though it's still around in lots of other dialects. But I'm sure you already knew that because you are way smarter than me. Number 7, Ethel, the letter that everyone's great aunt is named after. Ethel looks a bit like our previous letter and likewise has a lot to do with pronunciation, specifically words with a long E, so we're talking subpoena, fetus, and the such like. The pronunciation in question will depend if it is a Latin word or a Greek word, and if you want to know how to find out the language of origin, then simply shoot a friend request over to the closest Scripps spelling bee judge, and I'm sure that they would be more than happy to tell you. Number 8, win. So this one's pretty cool. It's a letter that basically came in second when English opened up the phone lines for public voting. You might not know it, but there was a time when English scribes didn't actually have a letter to represent the w sound. See, English gets a lot of its alphabet from Latin, and the sound w doesn't really get a lot of airtime in that circle. English writers had to figure out a way to make one. They started by just putting two U's together, but lots of scribes really hated that design. It looked odd and it took too long to write out, so the letter win was proposed. Win was used for a bit, and scribes really liked it, but for whatever reason, folks really couldn't break the habit of just using those two U's. Eventually, the court of public opinion weighed in, and the two U's won out, becoming the de facto letter that we know today as W.
Wow.
I bet you never knew that. Number 9, my personal favorite, yaw. Look at it, it's beautiful, beautiful. I love that design. We should use it for something. So Yawk was used for that noise that you make in the back of your throat when you say names like Bach or the Loch Ness Monster. Sadly, the confusion that it caused with the letter 3 ultimately doomed it from becoming permanent, and it was quickly abandoned and replaced with the GH combo. Interestingly, the sound that it indicates has sadly become silent in English, like though or daughter. I'd personally like to see Yawk make a comeback, but as long as that pesky number 3 keeps using the same symbol, it'll likely never happen. And finally, number 10, eng. Our last letter is a great example of a letter that should work great in theory, but creates too many problems in practice. Eng was created by a dude named Alexander GILL the Elder in 1619. He was an English scholar and spelling reformer, which evidently was a viable career choice in the 17th century. GILL was big on eng. He wanted it to replace the letter combination ng, and tried to soft open it in many of his writings. So king would look like this, thing would look like this, singing would look like this. It all makes sense, sort of, but G was really popular in letterland at the time, and printers really struggled to implement GILL's design. Readers had a hard time differentiating eng from in, especially if the ink started to fade, and it wasn't too long before the letter faded from use as well. But hey, you know what? There's nothing stopping you from using it if you want. The letter's actually still around on International Phonetic Alphabet keyboards, just throwing that out there. In fact, there's nothing stopping you from bringing any of these puppies back on the scene. All it'll take is stubborn determination and the convincing of an entire civilization. So why not get started today by sharing this video with everybody on your friends list or social media feed? Let everybody know that you're an intellectual guy because you watch intellectual videos just like this. Yes, share this video with everyone that you know, and everyone you know will know that you are very smart and exceptionally clever. The very future of English depends on you. Videos like this tickle your fancy? Want to see more? Get behind-the-scenes access by backing me on Patreon. Exclusive content, and you can even request a video topic. $1 a month to get in on the ground floor. Shout out to this video's sponsors. So that's that. Hope you learned a little something today. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Or don't. I don't really care.